Welcome to the DynastyVipers ViperCast. This is episode 27, and we are live. And you are not watching yet, but we are here either way. We are going to preview Week 11. Our good friend and co-host Jeff cannot be with us today. He's battling herpes or something on the side. We don't know what it is. He won't disclose it, so I will just make it up whatever I feel like right now. So hopefully he's watching and tuning into the show and correcting us as we go. If not, then we're going to go with the herpes story anyway. This week we've got some interesting things. Last week we missed putting out a challenge out there. We didn't do a challenge last week, so we definitely will be hitting one up this week. I haven't decided if we're going with the stinky boot or the wax them pits or what it's going to be like this week. Oh, that's the one right there. That's the one. As soon as I see Calvin give me that old little scrunchy nose thing going on there, I know that's the one we got to do. We will figure out something as we go along, but you're going to want to definitely tune in here tonight. Hit that like, hit that share. Even if you don't really like us, I seek attention in all the wrong places. So if you could show a little love, that'd be fantastic. I might have daddy issues. I'm not too sure. So let's go on without further ado. Got Calvin with me as always. Calvin, what did you learn from Week 10?
Well, what I'm learning from Wednesday, November 17th, is that Canadians are just as obsessed with Christmas as we are. I've got it's not even Thanksgiving yet, and we've got the Christmas tree up too, and so I'm excited to see you've got that as well. We've got I don't have any lights or anything up or anything, but neighbors have, and glad we're getting into the Christmas, the giving spirit, and we're here to give some fantasy advice, so it's time to be just generous in that Christmas spirit. I'm ready.
Well, for my brethren from the south there, we've already had our Thanksgiving up north. So we had it back in October. We kind of do this weird thing. I have taken American Thanksgiving off. I think I'm an honorary American at this point in my podcasting and fantasy football career. I take every Thursday, Friday of every American Thanksgiving. I make my turkey. I watch some football, and I get at it, so to speak, because why wouldn't you, right? So we're going to talk about that here in a couple of weeks. It's going to be fantastic here as we get into some of those games, which could be really interesting down the stretch there with those games that are coming up on Turkey Day, right? We've got the Redskins-Cowboys game, which could be a first-place showdown in the NFC East at that time. We've also got the Steelers and the Ravens, and we've got who I got? We got Detroit as the opening game, and they're against the Texans, I believe, this year. Right? Does that sound right? If not, don't fact check me.
I have no idea.
See, that's why I had to throw that in there right off the get-go, that don't fact check me, which we're going to copyright at some point.
Yeah.
Anyway, on to Week 11. We want to try and get this in rapid fire because Jeff's not here to slow us down this week. Who are we kidding? It's always me. It slows everything down. We've got the Cardinals and the Seahawks, which provide us an interesting matchup this week. What do you got going into this matchup, Thursday Night Football?
So I think one of my biggest takeaways from this game is the fact that we saw a lot more of Kenyon Drake than I think a lot of people were expecting coming off of his injury. Chase Edmonds still wound up with double-digit touches, which is really good for him, I think, in a backup role. He wasn't super productive. I think a lot of people were debating between him and Drake. So, I think we're going to probably, in my mind, I'm leaving him on my bench where I can. But Drake, this is not exactly a great matchup, but I mean, I think he is a guy that you want to start looking at who's going to get the opportunity, going to get the touches. He had 109 scrimmage yards on 17 touches last week, so I think that's something that we're obviously going to keep in mind. The real story, obviously, is that Kyler Murray is developing into a just uber superstar. Excited to see what we're seeing out of him, and now he gets this just cupcake matchup of the Seahawks defense that just can't seem to stop anybody through the air. So you're firing up every one of these options. Christian Kirk, he kind of came back down to earth last week, but we're definitely looking at him in terms of guys that we're rolling out there. And, obviously Hopkins, and super exciting from last week. Let's see if they can ride that momentum. And, why don't we go ahead? This is a good question to kick off talking about the I'll toss this over to you. What do you think about the Seahawks running back situation?
Okay, so I feel a little bit naked here right now because we don't have Jeff here to talk about Chris Carson. But if you tuned in last week, he was very optimistic that Chris Carson was going to be playing this week, even on the short week rest. This is Chris Carson's backfield. There's no mistake about it. Alex Collins has come in, giving you a little bit here and there. If you're in a very deep league, maybe you could still play Alex Collins, but for all intents and purposes, this is going to be the Chris Carson show again. I think he comes in, he picks up right where he left off, and I think that's why we're seeing the Seahawks struggle so much, because they have almost become one-dimensional in the way they're doing business, because I don't think teams are respecting the DJ Dallas, the Travis Homers, the Alex Collinses of the world. Without Chris Carson's presence there, they're free to play more of a zone and bracket coverage over either Lockett and DK or both of them at the same time, because there's no real third option right there, unless you consider Greg Olsen. David Moore's chipped in offensively too from the receiver position. But with Chris Carson, I believe, coming back this week, it's going to be his backfield and his backfield alone. Which brings me to the thing I'm looking at, the return of Chris Carson. I think he comes in. He's had 3-4 weeks off now, 3 weeks off now. I think he comes in, and I think he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, sitting back, watching this team struggle, steps in right away. I think he automatically makes that entire Seahawks offense click again. I think DK gets going. I think Tyler Lockett gets going. Russ starts cooking again. Then you see Russ go back to those. Did you notice? Let me back this up. Did you notice that wow, okay. Yeah, you definitely got to go pick up Lockett here. There's no doubt about that. I don't care what it costs you. If you've got fob left over, you go blow the rest of that fob. If you could go pick him up, I would grab him right away. I don't care what you got to drop. You're getting a wide receiver 1, a top 12 wide receiver if you pick up Lockett right now. But did you notice that we're talking about Russell Wilson MVP candidate until Chris Carson went down? Then you start to see Russ kind of fall out of that equation somewhat. I think there is a very good correlation between Russell Wilson's MVP candidacy and Chris Carson and what he means to that offense. Now, Russell Wilson's an MVP candidate no matter how you look at it, but Chris Carson gives them that dual threat where he can catch the ball out of the backfield, he can run the ball, but he also kind of draws defenders down to him, leaving more one-on-one coverage for either Lockett or DK. You can't double team both of them with Chris Carson in your lineup. How's that sound?
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think the one thing I'll add to the running back situation for the Seahawks is that it does look like for sure Carlos Hyde's going to be back. He was practicing in full participant. So I think that is a guy that if Carlos Hyde does go and if Chris Carson can't go, I think Hyde obviously becomes a little bit more interesting for us. He was used a little bit out of the backfield earlier in the year and, was pretty involved. And so, I think that's a guy that we can look at with some bye weeks and things like that. Some tougher matchups for some of our favorite guys. He's definitely worth looking at. Lockett being dropped is crazy. He is hurt, and we maybe if he sits out this week, we look at David Moore. But don't drop Lockett.
No, Linda, never do that. That's a no. Moving on here, Eagles Browns. What do we got here? What are you looking for in this Eagles-Browns matchup?
So last week, we kind of said Carson Wentz is getting some of his weapons back. And this is the week we're going to start to look at and say, what is Carson Wentz really? What is he the guy that's going to ultimately be the answer for Philadelphia? Is he not? And I kind of walked away with a little bit of an inconclusive, certainly a less than stellar performance from him last week. He does get another weapon back potentially this week. Again, I'd love to be able to ask Jeff about what he thinks about Zach Ertz, but he definitely came off of IR and looks like he could play here soon. I think Dallas Goedert is a great play this week, really good matchup. Looking at how the wide receivers were used last week, I think we have to take Travis Fulgham completely out of our rotation right now for who we're starting a wide receiver. He was only targeted one time last week. I think Jalen Reagor might be the only guy in terms of a wide receiver that we're looking at. And speaking of catching passes. Why is Miles Sanders not more involved in the passing game? Continues to be confusing to me. I saw you tweet that this week. I looked into it a little bit more. Don't understand why he's not being used more in that way. He was at the end of last season, and I just don't understand why he's not being utilized more in that role.
So, yeah, going back to that tweet that you seen me put out there, I thought it was very interesting that Miles Sanders has played in 6 of 9 games. He's only seen 30 targets, and he's only got 14 receptions. So 14 receptions over a 6-game period, so to speak, is just over 2 receptions per game for a running back who is very talented in the pass game. But for an Eagles team that did not have receivers at the time, which is the real catch-22, because if you don't have anyone who can catch the ball, why wouldn't you give it to your pass-catching running back, which they have not been doing? Last year, you remember there was a lot of talk of Miles Sanders or Josh Jacobs. A lot of people lean towards Miles Sanders because of that pass-catching ability. So what I'm looking for here is to see if they can get Miles Sanders involved in that passing game. But, man, put some respect on Travis Fulgham's name, would you? The dude has been beasting for Philadelphia. He'll continue to beast. Alshon Jeffrey came in, seen 1 target last week. He gets the Browns who are banged up. They're not really banged up. They're just not very good in the back end. We'll see what the weather's like again. The weather's always seems to be playing an interesting factor in all Browns games recently, especially games in Cleveland. So definitely something you want to be paying close attention to, where if we get that kind of nasty weather we've seen the last 2 weeks, going back to last week's game for the Browns against the Texans and going back to the Raiders game, those were very clearly games in which you could run the ball.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I actually he had 5 targets this past week. I'm sorry. I meant 1 reception. That's obviously now we're looking for out of him. But again, I'm not sure he's getting the best quarterback play right now, and the weapons around him are just not really producing the way you want to. Alshon Jeffrey is not really a concern. I want to talk about a wide receiver on the other side of this one. We really didn't mention Cleveland very much. Rashard Higgins. Hard to judge anything that happened in Cleveland from last week in the air because of the weather. But Rashard Higgins actually did lead the team in receiving yards. I really like what he's able to do. He's always had a good rapport with Baker Mayfield, and I really think that that's a guy that we can look at maybe as having some sneaky value for the remainder of the season.
I think a lot of people are jumping in on that Hollywood Higgins bandwagon right now because of Odell being gone, Jarvis Landry being the de facto number 1 wide receiver there. We've seen Njoku not even get a sniff last week as a tight end. Higgins, Donovan Peoples-Jones is a pretty sexy name right now for the Cleveland Browns. More for Dynasty. I don't see it. I don't buy it. There's nothing. DPJ just doesn't do it for me. I hope I got those letters right because I just kind of threw them out there real quick. Higgins is – I'm not going to put him in my lineup. I'm not really wanting to flex him even. But I think he's a stash right now that could potentially pay off come your fantasy playoffs. It doesn't hurt. If you got room for him on your roster, you can definitely stash him, redraft, dynasty, whatever you want to do. But for me, he doesn't quite I was watching the Fantasy Football Intervention Join the Circle show right before this, and Ray started talking about his prospects there, Najee Harris being with the Miami Dolphins, and his quote was, that thought makes his sweatpants rise. So I'm going to go the opposite, and Rashard Higgins does not make my sweatpants rise, okay? So,
yeah, not going to be a sexy name, no doubt. I want to just we mentioned Miles Sanders. I meant to mention this before. I'm going to throw this out a couple times during this show, but I found some interesting playoff matchups and some different things to talk about. Miles Sanders has the 4th worst running back fantasy playoff schedule this season. I think it's time to start thinking in those terms. If you're a team that's competing and you want to start looking, he is a guy that is going to potentially be challenged in the playoffs, though I don't know that right now is necessarily the best time to sell him, but just something to think about if you got him on your roster. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I'm on mute because I'm trying to find the words here to say this. So he's got the Seahawks next week, the Packers, the Saints, who are good against the run, the Cardinals. So, like you said, those are tough matchups. If you're going to, I don't know if there's a sell window for redraft for him. You're definitely not selling him, I don't think, in Dynasty. But if you're trying to make a push for the playoffs, like you said, I don't know if there's an opportunity to sell him. But week 16, your championship week, he's got the Dallas Cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got the space and you're willing to hang on to him, that's not a bad week to be able – if you can make it to your championship matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, that may pay off for you. Now, if we rewind this, some of his tougher matchups, remember, in week 5, he had the Pittsburgh Steelers. 11 carries, 80 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 receptions for 19. So he was able to hit pay dirt twice. I think one of those came on a big run.
It did,
well.
Yeah.
So let's try and put some context into the stats on this one, because I know there's that terminology: film lies, this lies, stats don't lie. Yeah, they kind of do to a sense here when you talk about running for 80 yards and 79 of them came on the one, and then you had a 1-yard touchdown or whatever it worked out to. It was something like that. It was a big run for a touchdown. Not really much going on elsewhere. The other matchup he had against a solid-ish run defense, I guess the best way to put it would be, well, last week, in week 6, I guess, against the Ravens, 9 carries, 118 yards. But those are some big plays that he had. 9 carries, 118 yards. That's a big splash play here and there, right? So outside of those big splash plays, Miles Sanders hasn't done a whole heck of a lot. Can he get back on track against the Browns this week? I don't know. So that's something definitely to keep an eye on that you're hoping for. Now, you're probably starting him no matter what because you're almost feeling guilty to do it. But I'm almost willing to do if I'm going after Travis Kelce in redraft, I may be willing to part a Hunter Henry with Miles Sanders to get Travis Kelce. Now, on the surface, if you're looking for name brand players, this may be enough to coax a Travis Kelce owner into making that trade for you. They get a solid tight end in Hunter Henry. They think they're getting a top-tier running back in Miles Sanders for redraft. Not so much. So that's kind of a trade I'm looking for if I'm moving on from Miles Sanders. I'll be willing to do a Hunter Henry, Miles Sanders for Travis Kelce type deal.
I like it.
You dig it? Yeah, I dig it.
Kelce, has the number 1 fantasy playoff matchup for all tight ends.
Yeah, and he's definitely, like I said, he's definitely someone I'm looking after. I'm trying to acquire everywhere, and I'm willing to give a solid tight end. Not saying Hunter Henry, Evan Ingram is in the Travis Kelce conversation, but they're viable options. And then you almost have to throw in that top-tier running back, that top-tier wide receiver as well, because to get the top tight end who is going to give you top-tier wide receiver numbers, you're going to have to give a little bit. And I think a Miles Sanders, maybe even a James Conner, might be a name brand enough to slide that deal through.
Yep, I like it.
Speaking of James Conner and sexy tier 1 running backs, we've got the James Robinson-led Jaguars hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. By the way, I am having a hard time recommending James Robinson in this matchup. I want to start him. I probably will start him, but it's probably going to be more towards a flex option rather than my RB1 or RB2. He's the RB3, RB4, no matter how you look at it, no matter what your league scoring system is right now. It's hard not to play him. Now, there's been a lot of talk, draft coming up. Do the Jags replace him? I think the answer is no. And a lot of people ask me, why were you so high on James Robinson from week 1? And the answer is simple. The workload has always been there. Leonard Fournette last year was a RB1 based on the same workload. And he was not finding the end zone, if you recall. James Robinson is finding the end zone. Therefore, is this sustainable? Absolutely. James Robinson's production is absolutely sustainable based on the workload in which he sees now and going forward. I don't see that changing in any way, shape, or form. And Jake Luton finding that connection with DJ Chark here and there, hooking up with Chris Keelan Cole. You saw him come up last week. I think James Robinson has enough offensive tools around him in the passing game to make him effective in the running game. Now, the Steelers are no easy task themselves. They're one of the more stingy defenses in the league. And Jake Luton, meet Mr. TJ Watt. Not a favorable matchup for you. But I've said this, and I'll say it again. How do you defeat pressure, especially as a young quarterback? Draw plays, screen plays. And I think James Robinson could be beneficial if they decide not to get Chris Thompson involved in the game. He could be a big PPR guy this week as well in that against the Steelers. But we've seen the last couple of weeks he hasn't been really factoring in much into that passing game. So I want to see if the legend of James Robinson can continue to grow. And as good as the Steelers have been, yes, they manhandled the Bengals last week, but the week before, Dallas gave them everything they could handle. And we know this, and you brought this up a couple of weeks ago when I picked the Steelers as my guarantee. They will play down from time to time to the level of their competition. It has happened. Can Jacksonville pull off the upset this week? What says you?
I don't know if they can pull off the upset with Jake Luton, but like you said, and I think it's specifically when you're talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers being on the road. When they're on the road, even in these times where they don't necessarily have fans in the stadium or a lot of fans or whatever it is, I don't know why, but when you get Big Ben on the road, when you get Mike Tomlin and the Steelers team away from home, they start playing down to their competition. And that, like you said, you saw that in Dallas. We projected that. Now, last week I said against the Bengals that you can expect them to blow them out, and they did. So this is another circumstance where they are on the road. So I actually kind of think that you might be able to see Jacksonville keep the game close enough that James Robinson does start to matter a little bit. But the problem is this Steelers defense is very tough. It doesn't matter whether it's against the pass, whether it's against the run. This defense is maybe the best. It's certainly not certainly one of the best in the NFL. And you definitely are having to start James Robinson probably if you've been relying on him this far, but the expectations are probably lower. Now, I will say you mentioned Chris Thompson. He was hobbled at the end of the last game. I'd love to be able to ask Jeff about him, but I do think that potentially opens up his PPR possibilities if Chris Thompson were to miss that game. So that is something to be watching there. On the Pittsburgh side, James Conner, that's my slump buster of the week right there. I think very possible Ben struggles a little bit. Again, road Ben. If he struggles in this matchup, you start to see them rely on James Conner a little bit more. The only reason why he let us down last week, they just threw the ball. It didn't matter that the game wasn't close. They continued to throw the ball. That could change if the game script, becomes a little bit closer, and you actually might expect them to run the ball more if it gets a little closer.
Okay, so if anyone needs a slump buster game, it is James Robinson. Sorry, James Conner. We have seen him start off the season against the Broncos, 106 yards. Against the Texans, 109 yards. Then he had a game against the Eagles with 44 yards, but he scored. The Browns, 101 yards. And then the last 2 weeks, you know what? Let's back this up. Let's go back even to the Ravens game. 15 carries, 47 yards, and a touchdown. The touchdown saved him from another bad week. Week 9, Dallas, 9 carries. 9 carries against a 31st ranked rush defense against the running back position. 9 carries, 22 yards, 2 catches for -2. Then let's bring it back to last week. I'm thinking, okay, you struggled against Cowboys. That should have been a guaranteed win. Whole team kind of struggled. Bengals. This is a slump buster week. We're going to get the Bengals here. 13 carries, 36 yards, 2 catches for 12. Are you kidding me? So now you follow up the 27th ranked defense against the running back position with now the 25th ranked defense against the running back position. James Conner needs a slump-busting performance more than any other player in the league right now. And it is that simple. Because he's got the Ravens next week, and then he's got a nice little playoff schedule. We talk about playoff schedules. You've got the Washington Football Club. You got the Bills, who've struggled against the running back position a little bit, and you've got the Bengals again. Now, normally I'd say they struggle, but they were able to keep James Conner in check in week 9. He needs this week more than probably any back right now. And I'll tell you what, I got hit a lot of shares of James Conner on my fantasy rosters right now, and I've been starting him. And this week, I'm very up in the air if I should start him or not because of the production lately. We're talking about a guy who hasn't even ran for, in the last 3 games, maybe 47, 36. Let's do some quick math. That's 50. That's 86. Barely 100 yards in 3 weeks. That's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it because we are in the thick of our playoff races right now in fantasy. I don't know about you, but I've got very few rosters that are 9-1. Very few.
Right.
I've got more rosters that are probably in that 6-3, 5-4. I think a lot of people are in that same boat this year because of the parity in the league. Parity in fantasy football I've seen probably more so this year than any other year. James Conner, bust that slump. He is, well, let's label this. Let's give a little fancy thing. We need like some kind of video editor here. Slump buster of the week. James Conner.
That's
something
right.
like that. We need some sort of fancy. That's what we need. We need an actual video guy on the show that can do this kind of stuff for us.
There we go.
But then again, we need a show sheet to prepare him for this kind of stuff too, which I don't do. You got anything else in this matchup before I move on to the next matchup this week?
No, let's go.
Let's rock and roll. Speaking of those teams that he needs to bust slumps against, we've got the Bengals visiting the Washington Football Club. Man, just the schedule itself flows so nicely to how we're talking here right now. So we've got the Cincinnati Bengals, Washington Football Club. I'll go flip it to you here right away. What do you got for this matchup?
Yeah, I think last week, did Washington show some cracks in their defense? I really had very low expectations for Matt Stafford. And you correctly called DeAndre Swift in that matchup as a plus match, and he performed very well last week. I am sort of wondering if they showed a little bit of weaknesses and whether or not Cincinnati Bengals can take advantage. Now, to be perfectly honest, I think Detroit is probably a much better team than the Bengals even are at this point, and that's not saying a lot. But I'm looking into this matchup to see what can we expect out of the Bengals. I was a little disappointed in Auden Tate last week. He had actually looked like he was doing really well. Started to uptick in his snap counts, things like that. But, it's hard to completely get rid of him because I feel like he looks the part when he's gotten opportunities. He's produced with them. You expect A.J. Green to be gone next year. Hopefully that is something that can help Auden Tate going forward. Obviously, T. Higgins is the biggest guy that you're starting this week. So, yeah, and here's a question that I have for you. As I toss this back over to your side, if we redid the rookie draft, you just mentioned James Robinson. Where would Antonio Gibson go if we were redoing the 2020 rookie draft? Mute.
Damn, mute button. I try and be polite and put everything on mute. I think you're looking at back end of the first round, early second round still. I do believe that you're looking at your Justin Jeffersons, your CD Lambs, your T. Higgins is probably putting himself up near the front of that conversation. James Robinson. I still believe people would go with Edwards-Helaire, go with JT, go the route of DeAndre Swift. So you're kind of pushing him back towards the back end of that first round here right now. And of course, Justin Herbert, if you're talking super flex, he is the number 1 overall pick right now. You might want to go with Joe Burrow. You look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie right now as far as that goes. Now, like Samson, Justin Herbert cut his hair. So we'll see what kind of goes from that. Now he looks like the boy in Toy Story with the zits and the large forehead that's like does bad things to his toys. But right now, I think Antonio Gibson's coming in right now in that 110 to 202 range if you were to redo that rookie draft. If you know what I'm saying there. We talk about the last matchup here with the Steelers, and we talk about Big Ben and how tough Big Ben is. Well, one of the more underrated quarterbacks on toughness is Matty Stafford. And Matt Stafford right now has a torn ligament in his thumb. Now, how does this affect this week's matchup here, right? With the going into the Lions? Well, you could kind of expect, I'm getting ahead of myself here, jumping into the Lions matchup. I should go back up to Washington, so we'll hang on to that fact. But going to this Bengals and Washington Football Club, I would have Antonio Gibson much higher if it wasn't for that dirty J.D. McKissick right now. McKissick is ruining a lot of things for my Antonio Gibson love right now. I believe in the first half, he had 9 receptions already. 9 receptions. I think he had 15. Don't fact check me. He either had 15 receptions or 15 targets. In that week. Targets in the week before. So he had like 9 by halftime, though, right? So these are numbers that you could be adding at least half of that on a typical game to Antonio Gibson, who can play a role in the passing game, and we've seen that. Why is J.D. McKissick even in there in the first place is what I want to know. He's been effective, but those are valuable touches that could be going to Antonio Gibson, especially for a running back who in college never had that workload to begin with. So you know he's fresh. You can give him those touches.
Yeah, and not only that, Gibson is catching a ton of his targets. That's one of the things that you kind of wonder if they would find a way to get him more involved that way, especially with Alex Smith. And I kind of wondered if we would see a repeat from J.D. McKissick in terms of his targets and his usage. And sure enough, I mean, he was right there for Alex Smith. Now, that didn't hamper Gibson's day. He still wound up with 2 touchdowns on the ground. So, you know, his effectiveness as a running back, I think, is maybe more surprising to me than anything else that we've seen. Like you said, he was much more of a wide receiver. So you didn't expect you expected for him to have a little bit of time to learn. But there's a lot of good things. And last note that I'll mention, Terry McLaurin has one of the best fantasy playoff schedules. So that's a guy that if you can find a way to add in your league, that's a guy you want.
So now I remember I was going with Matt Stafford. They played Washington last week, and that's where he did the damage to his thumb. So we'll move on to that matchup here in a little bit. But we also had Logan Thomas come back last week. And you know what? J.D. McKissick's getting his touches. Gibson's getting those touchdowns. Kind of affects the value of McLaurin a little bit, because I was really hoping McLaurin would have a huge week against the Detroit Lions. But this week he's got a very favorable matchup, whether it's Dre Kirkpatrick on him or not. Dre Kirkpatrick's a little danged up, a little hamstring injury. He probably will play because he's tough as they come when it comes to the cornerback position. But if you've only got one leg, defending Terry McLaurin ain't for you, man. It ain't for you. You could have 2 legs and be one of the best cover corners in the league, and Terry McLaurin's going to give you fits. So if you're down to 1 leg, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Say a little prayer for you here right now ahead of time. I like Washington a lot. I think, man, this is an interesting matchup for me because Washington's front, I brag about it all year. They've looked mediocre the last couple weeks that we've watched them. The Bengals do not have a very good line. They don't. And right now, when we talk about Joe Burrow, we can say the same thing with Justin Herbert at this time. By week 9, week 10, you're no longer a rookie. You're a vet by halfway through the season. So any rookie mistakes you may have had are probably out the window. Any kind of exotic pressures you're going to see, blitz packages you're going to face, you've probably already seen them by this point. So you're no longer a rookie. Now, if this matchup would have been earlier in the season, I would have said Joe Burrow would have had a lot of troubles with that front, with Chase Young and Allen and Deron Payne, and the list goes on and on. Now he's a seasoned vet. he's got his 9 starts under his belt. He's going into Washington for this week's matchup. Let's see what he can do now. He's got the weapons. There's no excuses. He's got Tyler Boyd. If he can hang on to the ball, I guess is the best way to put it this week, because he had some big plays too last week with a little bit of garbage time. But this is an interesting matchup because I really want to see what Joe Burrow does with a front like Washington's. But on the flip side, and the comeback player of the year award goes to Alex Smith.
Mm-hmm.
It don't matter what goes on the rest of the week. He put up 390 yards last week in offense. 390 yards passing. The only reason we're not talking about him is because he couldn't get the end zone. They got it through the running game.
Mm-hmm.
If he takes a couple of those Antonio Gibson and he throws them to Antonio Gibson, gets 2 touchdowns in there, and for a fantasy perspective, we're talking about a guy who throws for almost 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. Everyone's sweatpants are moving in the right direction, if you know what I'm saying.
Just wish we could get something like that out of Derek Carr, right?
Love me some Derek Carr, love me some Alex Smith. And I'll tell you what, he's got an opportunity to go for 300-plus yards again against the Cincinnati Bengals this week.
Yep.
So let's see if we can keep that momentum going, keep that Alex Smith love train rolling on through. Speaking of quarterbacks who are disrespected, I've mentioned his name multiple times. One of the toughest sons of a biscuits in the league right now, Matty Stafford, with a little damage to the ligament of his thumb. I fully expect him to be playing this week because we have seen what happens when the backup quarterback goes in for the Detroit Lions, and it's not pretty. Matt Stafford does not want that to happen. Matt Stafford's got some weapons. Kenny Galladay looks like he's trending in the right direction. Whether he plays or not is unknown right now. I think he's going to be we'll find out more on Saturday about his condition. I think he's probably going to be in the lineup this week with Marvin Jones, Marvin Hall, Marvin Gaye. I don't know. Any Marvin you can put out there, I'm sure the Lions already have him on their roster. What do you got for this one?
I just continue to be perplexed by Matt Stafford, honestly. I feel like he's maybe the most unpredictable quarterback in the league. You talked about him being underrated. I think he probably is a fine NFL quarterback. No clue what to do with him. Arm
talent-wise, Matty Stafford may have a top 3, if not a top 2, and I'm not talking about the number 2 arm in the National Football League when it comes to arm talent.
Sure. But okay, look at this. So here we go. He faced the 3rd worst team in giving up fantasy points to the quarterback. He puts up 16 points against Jacksonville. He faces the Atlanta Falcons, who everybody throws all over. He puts up 21. Okay, I mean, that's whatever. He faces the best team against fantasy quarterbacks in the Indianapolis Colts in Week 8. He puts up almost 30. Last week, 2 weeks ago against Minnesota, they're 20th. They're, bottom 3rd. He gets 14 points. Washington, who's the top 10 against fantasy quarterbacks, 25 points, almost 26. So it continues to be kind of perplexing on when you're going to see him do well and when you're not going to see him do well. Did not expect good things for him last week, and he absolutely lit up Washington and that secondary, who have been very stingy up until that point. So kind of can't figure out exactly what to do with him. I guess at this point, if you got him on your roster, you're rolling him out there. Carolina gave up, obviously, big day last week to Tom Brady and company. He doesn't quite have those weapons, but what he does have out of the backfield is DeAndre Swift. And we talked about him a lot in the offseason. I talked about him. I wrote about him in the offseason preview. His fit in this offense was always perfect. I never understood when they brought in Adrian Peterson, but it does look like, and again, we mentioned it last week, they have righted some wrongs in that. And now with some time to learn, all of that, Adrian Peterson is now folded back to the back. It's good to have him there. DeAndre Swift is rightfully taking his place at the top of this running back hill, and I really like what we're seeing out of him right now.
Okay, so first off, I'm glad you mentioned Matty Stafford there. We call that the Matty Seesaw. The Matt Stafford Seesaw is what that is. Stafford Seesaw, whatever, however you want to break it down. Up and down, up and down. Beginning of the season, I actually went in feeling very comfortable with Carson Wentz and Matt Stafford as my quarterbacks in multiple leagues. Unfortunately for me, I could never pick the right quarterback in the right week. Like you said, Matt Stafford would have a favorable matchup. You put him in, you sit Wentz, the vice versa. Matt Stafford has a match against the Colts, a number one defense. You're like, hey, this is a Carson Wentz game. Wrong. Now, that's not really as much. That's on Stafford and Wentz because Wentz has struggled as well. But you're thinking with Matt Stafford, you're playing the matchups. He's a matchup quarterback. He's not a Kyler Murray. He's not a Patrick Mahomes where you're automatically throwing him out there every week. Luckily for me, in a lot of those leagues, I also had Justin Herbert. And Justin Herbert's been my man. I dropped Carson Wentz. I dropped Matt Stafford. I'm rolling with Boy Wonder himself. Now, going to your second point here on Adrian Peterson, and you may want to fact check this one or not. Who was the running back who essentially replaced Adrian Peterson in Minnesota?
Oh, I don't know. I don't remember.
Neither do I. That's because they don't fact check it. I believe he was gone before Cook got there.
Yeah. Was it Amir Abdullah?
I'm trying to Google that here right quick here, so I'm not too sure if they were both in camp together or not. I'm not even sure. Man, I'm glad there's only one person. If the one person watching has that information, that would be fantastic.
Was it Jerick McKinnon?
Yeah, well, Jerick McKinnon was definitely there with Adrian Peterson. There's no doubt about that. But I don't believe that Peterson was there when Cook came in as a rookie. I mean, it's easy enough to pull up their stats and see if there's a correlation between the two. But anyway, that's not my point. When Adrian Peterson was in with the Saints, Alvin Kamara was there. When Adrian Peterson went over to Washington, Antonio Gibson was there. When he went to Detroit, DeAndre Swift was there. In each case, Peterson was the guy to start with and then passed the crown on to the young buck. Here you go, Kamara. It's all yours. Here you go, Gibson. It's all yours. It was only a matter of time until he goes, DeAndre, young bull, the crown is yours, my friend. Here you go. And it took a little bit longer than maybe we expected, but here we are going into week 11. Week 10, it was kind of the Swift getting going, Peterson taking that step back. He is doing exactly what I thought he was going to do at the beginning of the season. I didn't think this was going to be Adrian Peterson's backfield from start to finish. You knew at some point he was going to give way to Swift because the talent was always there in Swift, but he was in there for a mentorship role more than anything. And for 10 weeks, we've talked about that on the ViperCast. I think his name's come up in this one way, shape, or form, as I've mentioned, that mentorship role. And I think that's what the plan was all along in Detroit was, okay, Peterson, take this guy, teach him how to be a professional. Teach him how to get in the playbook, understand that, how to go to the meetings. And once he's got all that, then his talent on the field will play out. So I think that was the game plan.
Here's my one more thing. DJ Moore, sell him. Like, this is the perfect opportunity. He just had a really good game. It was still only 7 targets. And the matchups for him in the playoffs are not good. This is an opportunity right now, if you can, coming off of last week's game, if you can sell him for Cooper Kupp, do it.
Oh, I love me some Cooper Kupp. Don't be getting me all going on the exciting because Cooper Kupp's another guy that makes my sweatpants rise. But when we talk about DJ Moore, I think you've got a little room to kind of play this out. You've got the Lions, obviously, this week, a very bad defense. And then you've got the Vikings next week. So week 11 and 12, you have an opportunity to drive that cost up considerably. So if you look at some like these matchups here, we're talking about the Lions themselves going into week 11 here. Big game, Anthony Miller had a good game week 1, and Allen Robinson had an okay game. Believe it or not, they actually held Devontae Adams in check back in week 2 to 36 receiving yards on 3 receptions. Now, don't fact check the numbers because there's other underlying causes to why those numbers were that way. And then things kind of went off the edge here a little bit. Andy Isabella, DeAndre Hopkins destroyed him in week 3. Then you had some guy named Traquan Smith. Yes, Traquan Smith, not Mike Thomas in week 4, did damage for the Saints. Then you move on to week 6, where it was the Keelan Cole show, which he's had 2 big weeks now that I can remember. That one and the week we just seen. Moving on to week 7, Calvin Ridley, Julio, they did their thing. Week 8, they held the Colts pretty much in check. Week 9, nothing really got going for Minnesota. And then week 10, we saw here that there was not a whole lot going. Terry McLaurin got his almost 100-yard game, or did get a 100-yard game, just didn't get the end zone. Isaiah Wright, Cam Sims, they factored in a little bit to the equation too. So this could be a game in which you see him bust a slump, so to speak. He busted it last week against the Bucs, who you probably wouldn't have expected to begin with. But the Vikings in a couple weeks and the Lions this week are opportunities for him to get going and then sell him. Because like you said, now you got some tougher matchups after that. In the fantasy playoffs, you've got the Packers there right before your semifinals, which we know is going to be a tough matchup for anybody, right? So,
right.
What else we got here? So that's it for I really have for Bridgewater is also kind of a little dinged up here right now. I'm really torn on this match. So this game here right now, who is my pick to win? Who do you got for this match?
I'll take Carolina because they are at home. They've been playing a lot tougher. Now, last week was not very good, but I'm expecting them to bounce back. Stafford is very tough, and I do like what Matt Stafford can do, but he's banged up right now too. So this could end up being a Chase Daniel versus PJ Tucker game, which would be very ugly. So I don't know. You flip a coin.
Well, my boy Sal Powell would absolutely love that because anytime a backup quarterback gets in there, Sal gets his wings. You know what I'm saying? We're going to move on to another team that has wings. The Atlanta Falcons are visiting your Saints. I'm going to give you the floor here before I shit all over you.
Okay, so obviously the biggest story in this matchup is the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. I mean, I think it's really interesting to me that Sean Payton has not named a starting quarterback for this weekend. That's not typically something that he's done. If you rewind to last year, he was pretty quick to say Teddy Bridgewater was going to be the guy after Drew Brees got injured. So the fact that he's not fully endorsing Jameis Winston in this matchup, that's just something to keep note of. Now, I still think he's the favorite to start. I don't know. I don't know that you're going to expect a huge game from him. Honestly, even though this is a plus matchup, this is something that I think the Falcons, give up a lot of points to fantasy quarterbacks. My worry is this. My worry is the New Orleans Saints have a very particular type of offense that they are running. And what happened last week when Jameis Winston came in is you saw a quarterback who's used to being a gunslinger trying to operate in an offense where they're asking them to throw 5, 6, 7-yard passes. And Jameis Winston just looked uncomfortable to me. Now, is it because of the offense? Is it because, some guys do great when they're thrust into action like that? Some guys don't. Does a full week of preparation, does that help him in this? I think that's what we're going to see. If you want the right matchup to try to get on the right page, this is the right one. The one thing I will say, I don't care if he starts or not. Taysom Hill, in those leagues where you can start him as a wide receiver or a flex, that's a cheat code. He's going to get enough work one way or another to be used in that wide receiver or maybe in a flex spot. So that's whether he starts or not. That's a guy that you could potentially use this week if he happens to be just on your waiver wire. And then if he ends up being the starting quarterback and you can play him as a wide receiver, you're almost a super flex at that point. So just something to watch. I mean, I definitely, there's things to say, in there about Atlanta, but yeah, I think C. Boyd's here has a pretty interesting stat line that'll make Sean Payton's head explode. And if that comes anywhere close to happening, or it looks like it might happen, you're going to see a lot of Taysom Hill.
So here's my take on this whole thing. My buddy there, Clayton, just pops in. He's probably pretty dang close on this one. Winston, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Probably half, and probably those 3 interceptions, 2 probably go for touchdown the other direction. Here's how I'm looking at this. Winston is the better quarterback of the two. Taysom's the bigger mismatch all over the place. I have to admit, I don't have any ESPN leagues, but I do believe Matt Berry was on Twitter there the other day. He was talking about Taysom Hill actually had tight end eligibility. You want to talk about cheat code? That's a cheat code, being able to put Taysom Hill in as a tight end. Now, going into this matchup, I'm not in on any of the Saints offense here. Your boy there, Slant Boy, he hasn't done nothing since coming back to the lineup. Emmanuel Sanders hasn't done very much since Thomas has come back to the lineup. It's been the Alvin Kamara show. And he has, last week, even though he found the end zone multiple times, he was not a game changer. He really wasn't. Those came on little short little passes, little plays. It wasn't your typical, oh, damn, son, kind of Alvin Kamara game. You know what I'm saying? Now, you flip it over. It sounds like Calvin Ridley is going to be back for the Falcons. Julio Jones has had a week to rest. Matt Ryan, he's ready to go. He's Matt Ryan. The Saints are hot. They're winning. Everything's coming up Saints. This feels like a Falcons win right now. We know when you put the Saints and you put the Falcons together, throw away that record, because you've seen this time and time again. If the Falcons are playoff bound and the Saints are a wild card team or worse, the Saints are going to find a way to knock them off. The opposite is true as well. When the Saints are marching in, see what I did that one just for you.
Appreciate
the Falcons are that team that always has that ability to knock them off. There's not a DB, I don't care, Marshawn Lattimore, that can hold Julio Jones's jockstrap. There isn't. Julio Jones is the best wide receiver, not named Nuke Hopkins, in the National Football League. He is a size speed freak. No question about it. Even a Saints fan can't knock Julio Jones because he's from Alabama. He played for the Crimson Tide. That all said, Calvin Ridley brings another dimension to this offense that, yes, the Saints defense has been playing good, but you had Julio and Calvin together. Now, unfortunately for Julio, that probably means Calvin's going to catch the touchdown passes because Julio won't be there to do it. But you know what I'm saying? This just has that feeling and has a Todd Gurley type, I'm going to get 56 yards, maybe 2 touchdowns as well kind of game. Todd Gurley is right up there when it comes to fantasy points this year because he's finding that end zone. He's got that consistency in finding that end zone, and that's what you want in fantasy. Those yards are good. Those yards are great. It's fantastic to get 98 to 112 yards, but give me 40 yards and a touchdown. I'll take that all day over 150 yards rushing. You know what I'm saying? It's the same thing, but I just feel that this is a game that the Falcons offense is going to go get clicking, and Breeze not being in this lineup, it feels like the offense for New Orleans could become quite gimmicky quickly. How do you feel about that statement?
I mean, 100%. I think Sean Payton can get into those traps and have those tendencies. I mean, that's one thing that, he's really creative. He's obviously a fantastic coach. It's just a matter of, when you've got Jameis Winston and you're trying to win the turnover battle, which is what the Saints have really been preaching hard. And you got, that's Drew Brees protecting the ball. You saw Teddy Bridgewater last year. They turned to the run a lot. But are they going to be able to do that? Now, could that be a case for Latavius Murray maybe having a little bit better game? I do think no matter who starts, this is a really good matchup for Jared Cook, who was shut out last week. I think we're trusting him this week. I think the Falcons have not been very good.
Nope, not going to do it.
Been good against the tight end. You want to start Jared Cook this week. Now,
I'm petty. You know me. I'm petty. There's no way in hell I'm putting Jared Cook in after what he did. He done me wrong last week. He done me wrong. He done me dirty. He ain't going into my lineup after last week. That means anyone who's watching, put Jared Cook in your lineup because he's going to do me dirty again this week.
Yes. Yeah, but hey, you can't chase last week's points, and you can't make up for last week's lack of points by not starting a guy when he has a really good matchup. Now, again, this is going to be an exciting experiment as a Saints fan who is looking at the real possibility that Drew Brees is not back next week. This is an opportunity to see, is Jameis Winston potentially going to be an answer for us in the future? Or, as I've been speculating, does Taysom Hill wind up being Sean Payton's favorite toy and get to run a little bit of a much different offense than he was with Drew Brees? I think that's definitely a possibility. Like you said, you throw the records out. This is a great NFC South shootout, potential game, or maybe the defenses step up and it's a tight matchup. Either way, it's going to be close. It doesn't matter what the matchups are. This is definitely one of the games you want to tune into on this slate, no doubt.
Yeah, we went from a week last week where it was 6 games in the morning and 6 in the afternoon kind of thing to back to our normal regular schedule here. But we've got we got 4 afternoon games here this week. We're heading into our afternoon schedule here pretty soon. So let's talk Titans-Ravens here quickly. Both teams are reeling right now after taking some pretty bad losses in the past couple weeks. Is there a way that either one of these offenses can get going here? Because right now, the Greg Roman-led offense, I can't see get going. We talked about it with Jeff last week. You've mentioned it in the past too. Greg Roman offenses seem to get sniffed out after the second season, even going into the third season of teams. Colin Kaepernick, now Lamar Jackson. We've seen this time and time again with the Greg Roman offense. What do you got here?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at both of these teams, I mean, they've been very up and down, maybe is the right way to put it, but they have not been very consistent. I think one of the guys that has not been super consistent for us, although he bounced back a little bit last week, was Mark Andrews. I think this is the kind of week where you start to look at him as a slump buster type week. I think whereas last week I probably wasn't trusting him. He did get 7 receptions, 61 yards, which is fine. 13 PPR fantasy points, but this week against the Titans, they've not been very good against the tight end. So that's a guy I'm probably rolling out there. But overall, I mean, every one of these situations are difficult for fantasy for this week. You've got the running back situation in Baltimore, which is a 3-headed monster. J.K. Dobbins, back into the back seat there. I mean, that's with Ingram back. I mean, he's the guy that's going to be in the lineup. He's a better pass blocker. Huge locker room guy. They rally around him. They love him. Gus did fine. I know he's your guy, but again, he's getting a lot of carries when he gets snaps, but he's not getting enough snaps to ultimately feel comfortable putting him in your lineup, even though he looks fine. He actually looks pretty good when he's out there. One name that's interesting to me, rookie wide receiver that's finally overtaken Miles Boykin, is Devin Duvernay. He's starting to get his usage increased. We talked about Michael Pittman that happening for him last week, and then he went out and had a really good game. I think Duvernay could potentially be one of those, toss him into your lineup if you're really struggling and you need somebody to start. That might not be a bad option. He's not going to get more than 4 or 5 targets, but could produce for us if you're desperate.
2 quick things. Gus Williams, I think you can put him in your lineup as a flex option, hoping for that touchdown floor. You got 4 teams, I think, on bye this week, so he's not a terrible option to have in the flex. Just understand his value comes in scoring a potential touchdown in this game. Quick game here. Who would you rather, Mark Andrews or Noah Fant?
This week I'll take Andrews. I mean, I obviously love Fant, but
okay, enough.
He continues to be
Mark Andrews or Tyler Eifert.
Andrews.
Mark Andrews or Kyle Rudolph?
Andrews.
Mark Andrews or Darren Fells?
Andrews.
You're doing good so far. Mark Andrews or Eric Ebron?
That one gets closer, but still Andrews for me.
Okay. Jimmy Graham or Mark Andrews?
Andrews.
These are so everyone that you chose Andrews over had success against the Tennessee Titans. So you passed this test barely. You almost let that slip a couple times. Some of varying degrees here and whatnot. But like you said, the Titans are a favorable matchup. So if you got Mark Andrews, you're definitely putting him in. And if it wasn't for that injury, you got to remember, here's a big one. Boyle went down last week. Boyle is that dirty Raven. I mean this in the most complimentary way. That was vulturing touchdowns from Mark Andrews from time to time. So now you don't have Nick Boyle taking away potential touchdown targets in the red zone from Mark Andrews. Fire up Mark Andrews. I think you're right. Here's a slump buster week. He's going to get going again. Now, when I say slump buster, he still had 7 receptions for 61 yards against the Patriots. But coming into that game, week 6, Eagles, 21 yards, 2 catches. Week 8, 32 and 3 receptions against the Steelers. 3 for 22 against the Colts. He was struggling going into the Patriots. So I think he got going against the Patriots, and I think it's going to continue going against the Titans, heading into the big matchup against the Steelers in week 12. Whoo, got a little bit of sore throat here.
Hey, real quick, just look, Derrick Henry, just that's a guy that in dynasty circles, just depending on what team he is on, if you're looking at playoff matchups, Derrick Henry's matchups are very good. If you want to talk about a guy that you can add to your roster, listen to this. I would say in a redraft league, not in a dynasty league, redraft league, I'm trading Dalvin Cook for Derrick Henry.
I don't hate that at all. I think that's pretty based on the schedule that you're going to see here going forward. I really think that's probably a smart play. Would I do it? Probably not, but I could definitely see you get involved on something like that, especially at that running back position that we know Derrick Henry. We know this time of the season is Derrick Henry time. It don't matter. The only difference between this season and seasons past is he's producing early this season, where he didn't have that production years past, last 2 seasons. This year, he had that production early. Can he sustain that for the rest of the season? That's going to be the question, because he started off hot. Does he finish strong like he has the last 2 years? And also, I've got to say this because I'm contractually obligated to say this. It's Corey Davis season. Now, moving on to those Patriots that we talked about, Mark Andrews busting that slump again. It's the Texans. You want a slump buster game? You put your offense out there against the Houston Texans defense. Fire up there, Damian Harris. Fire up Jacoby Myers. I don't know if N'Keal Harry's playing, but fire him up too. Julian Edelman may be coming off IR this week. Fire him up too against the Houston Texans. It don't matter. But I'll tell you what, who you don't fire up. You don't fire up the receiver who's going to be covered by J.C. Jackson. That's a no-no, man. J.C. Jackson's been a playmaker for the Patriots in that secondary all season. Woo, baby. Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, I don't know, man. I don't know. What do you got?
Brandon Cooks' revenge game this week. Come on. It's revenge game season right now. And Brandon Cooks, he's coming off a week where you can't get too mad at him for not helping you out last week in the weather that he played in. So
you obviously don't know me very well after this far in the season. I get mad at anybody for no reason.
It was not if you were paying attention to the weather, you weren't starting any of your Texans wide receivers. And, this is a week where you're probably right. He's not going to do very much for us. The Patriots are actually a pretty tough matchup. And they have a chance, talk about NFL for a second, they have a chance to get back to 500, which seemed crazy just a few weeks ago. They looked lost. They looked like they were, they were one of the worst teams. And all of a sudden they got a chance to get back to 500 and maybe make a push for the playoffs. I'm not sure 100% about that. But I will say this. I do know that the best fantasy asset on that entire team is Damian Harris. He looks like the real deal. Coming out of Alabama, I know he's your guy. But he looks fantastic. I mean, he looks like the best running back we've seen the Patriots have in a very long time. They spent a pretty good draft pick on him, and that's worked out pretty well. And yeah, I continue to be just I'm amazed by Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers, I love him. I hope Julian Edelman just stays away because I think he's better than Julian Edelman right now. And Cam Newton loves him, so keep firing him up.
Bottom line is, it doesn't matter which running back you are. Cam Newton's still your best running back. You know he's going to vulture those touchdowns in the red zone.
True.
But that all said, I'm not entirely against firing up your Texans here either. I think Duke Johnson's a solid flex play against the Patriots, more because of the workload. David Johnson's on IR. He's still out. You've got Darren Fells, I think, could be a factor in this game too in the end zone. I'm obviously going to be as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 options. Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks, you could do worse than. Even though I'd be very interested in who's got J.C. Jackson assignment because, man, he has been playing some of the best football of any corner I have seen. All he does is make picks. I think he's got 4 on the season now, and you can fact check that. At least hopefully I seen that on Twitter somewhere. So it's about 50-50 whether true. That's correct. It's got to be correct. Anything I see on the internet's true, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's going to be an interesting one here. We know the Patriots, like you said, could get to 500. That AFC, if they can get to 500, that AFC East tightens up because the Dolphins are 6-3. The that other team there in Buffalo, they're 7-2, I believe, right now. But you get the Patriots there at 500, if they can get themselves back to 5-5, suddenly that becomes a little more interesting. I still think it's the Bills division. I still think the Dolphins are better than the Patriots, but we'll see. We do know that the Patriots, you can move the ball on. You can pass on the Patriots, and we know Deshaun Watson has a hose on him. He's going to let that ball rip from time to time. So I think this could be a high-scoring game. But one more thing. My boy, Kyle Duggar, he was a factor last week. He got into the tackling game. We're about to see the unicorn get released out there. I'm telling you, anyone who tuned in for my rookie shows knows I love me some Kyle Duggar. He was one of the guys I was way out ahead of last year's pre-draft kind of stuff there. Kyle Duggar, fantastic player. A Bill Belichick kind of guy where you can move him in and around just like Jeremy Chin, just like you thought Isaiah Simmons would be used. Now we're seeing him get used. He's going to be an interesting one in this matchup too because of that speed on the outside that the Texans have. And with the way they get behind, forget last week. Last week's matchup against the Browns, just like the week before against the Browns and the Raiders, weather played a huge factor in that. Weather won't be as big of a factor, I don't think, this week in the dome. Okay, of Houston. Moving on. You like Miami here. Denver Broncos. Sounds like Drew Lock is out. What do you got for this matchup?
Yeah, I think my biggest hope, if I could just be like in charge of everything right now, is I'd love to see Tua get unleashed a little bit. Like he's played in some game scripts where he just has not had to pass the ball very much. And we were looking forward to that matchup last week with him and Justin Herbert. And he just didn't really have to open things up. I mean, the running back played really well. The defense is doing fantastic there in Miami. There's a lot of great things happening. I love that team, but there has not been enough of him being able to open it up. And with Brett Rippon likely to start at quarterback here, I don't know that that's going to change. So when I think about Tua, when I think about, I hope you have another guy on your roster that you can plug in terms of fantasy right now. And his matchups really aren't great. It's actually the worst fantasy QB schedule in the fantasy playoffs. Not a guy that you necessarily want to be firing up. And if they're not opening things up, I'm lowering my expectations for him. I will say on the other side, I really like what KJ Hamler's been doing. And I think even with Brett Rippon, I think KJ Hamler, what he can do is route running, everything that it is the kind of guy that a quarterback like Brett Rippon could potentially rely on. So could see some Tim Patrick in this one, could see some KJ Hamler. He's been getting double-digit targets. So I like him. Noah Fant, great fantasy playoff schedule. And so I'm looking forward to this game.
So you figure that it's going to be Rippon getting the start here, eh? Is that who they're leaning towards?
Let's toss it to Jeff. Okay, no, he's not there. He's battling.
So I'm gonna go the opposite here of you. You want to go KJ Hamler here? I'm gonna go Tim Patrick as your play here. Why am I going Tim Patrick? Go back to week 4. Week 4, Brett Rippon got the start, his first start there from Boise State. Who was his target? Tim Patrick. 6 catches, 113 yards, 1 touchdown. Let's rekindle some of that magic, baby. But bottom line is, Tua is going to be 4-0 when this is all done and have twice as many wins as Joe Burrow.
KJ Hamler did get hurt in that game, by the way.
But I was told stats don't lie. I was told numbers don't lie.
Not to fact check you or anything, but
No, I was told by people smarter than. Well, I guess that's really open right there. I was told by people smarter than me that numbers do not lie. Are you telling me my numbers are lying to me right now?
There's also this guy in the North Pole that, may not actually deliver presents to children. May not.
Yeah, I think you're probably correct on that. I don't need to fact check you on that one there. I'm pretty confident he doesn't come here because it costs me a fortune every Christmas in my house. So I'm pretty confident he doesn't slide me a few bills under the table here. So I can't even remember what game we're talking about now.
That was Miami, Denver. But I think
Miami. Yeah, I think Allman. Wow, we're getting there, aren't we? I think the Dolphins are. If you're going to get a shot at the Denver Broncos, now's the time, especially as a rookie. I don't think they're going to be able to put points up. But the most underrated part of the Dolphins right now is that defense. It's starting to get. There's some whispers starting to come about how good that defense really is. That defense is Brian Flores. Let's call it the way it is. That team in Miami is taking shape of their head coach, Brian Flores, and they're playing that way. They're playing with that grit. They have that identity, which is fantastic, which is going to make them a very difficult team, no matter who you are when it comes down to it. Speaking of teams that are not very good, we have the soon-to-be team drafting Trevor Lawrence in the New York Football Jets against Boy Wonder and the Los Angeles Chargers. What do you got?
Yeah, I guess I'm most interested in this game and seeing Adam Gase says that LaMichael Pirine is going to get more work. He actually has said that before. I'm not sure if that's even good. I don't trust anything that Adam Gase says. So if you happen to be hanging on Adam Gase's word for that, I suggest you look elsewhere. The biggest thing in terms of the Jets is these are guys that, because of Trevor Lawrence maybe being the quarterback next year, maybe we start looking at Denzel Mims and Jamison Crowder, some of these guys, in terms of going to try to buy them in your dynasty leagues. That's really about the only thing we can say about this Jets team right now. Everything on the field is just awful. I'm not interested in any of them. On the other side, Kalen Ballage, with back-to-back revenge weeks, played well against Miami last week. Now he gets to go against his former boss, Adam Gase, who traded for him and then rejected the trade and all this stuff. And he gets revenge. He officially named the starter last week. So I mean, of all the surprising things, I'm actually going to recommend that we start Kalen Ballage this week. I never thought I would ever say that. So there we go.
So in his last start, Joe Flacco actually did really good against the Patriots. So let's give a little credit where credit is due here. Denzel Mims, Rashad Perryman were both in the lineup for that game. Dare I say, this seems like a no-brainer for the Chargers. But this feels like the type of game the Chargers are going to find a way to lose. The Jets are really playing for Trevor Lawrence at this point. I don't even want to say they're not playing for nothing because they really are playing for a generational type quarterback here in Trevor Lawrence. He may be the best quarterback we've seen even before Andrew Luck. Peyton Manning, maybe. He may be the best quarterback we've seen come out of college since Peyton Manning.
Joe Burrow?
One season. Come on. He's had one season of success. Get off of Joe Burrow already.
He is the best quarterback prospect since Joe Burrow. I'll give you that.
Tua's got more wins in the National Football League than Joe Burrow, and he's only played 3 games. Facts. That said, this feels like a Jets win. Why? Because this is the type of game that is going to screw 2 franchises instead of just one. This is a game that you go, that is so Chargers. It is. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to Bagley missing a 48-yard field goal to win the game or send it to overtime or whatever. It's going to go doink and then miss. And somehow the Jets will find themselves with the number 2 overall pick behind the Jaguars after this week's game. That is what this feels like to me. Who wants to lose more? You know what I'm saying? The Chargers are far superior. Justin Herbert is probably going to throw for 350 and like 3 touchdowns, and he's going to have a monster game. But somehow, some way, the Chargers will find a way to lose this one. Because the Chargers have been in more one-score games than I think any team in the league. And the Jets should have beat the Patriots 2 weeks ago.
I'm not.
That would have been. That would have been the ultimate Bill Belichick move, losing to the Jets, thus improving the Patriots draft spot and hurting the Jets draft spot. That would have been a Bill Belichick move. You ain't buying what I'm selling? Well, I don't care because we're going to the Packers and the Colts now. Packers, Colts. We talk about good pass defense. You mentioned the Colts pass defense earlier on. But have they really faced Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams? No. Then again, I said this the week before, or the week before that even, that the Colts haven't really faced anyone, so to speak. I keep doubting the Colts. I keep doubting them. But you know my boy, Isaiah Rodgers. I love me some Isaiah Rodgers. The UMass product, cornerback, kick returner extraordinaire for the Colts. Shout out, much love to him. Love that man. Love him. I may be swayed to pick the Colts in this game. I do believe that we are going to see Michael Pittman outproduce Davante Adams this week.
Ooh.
That is my spicy take. Michael Pittman outproducing Davante Adams. Here's why. We know the Colts can move the ball, and they move it because of a certain running back who's not named JT. Nyheim Hines is a ball mover. You put Michael Pittman, you get him within the 20 yards of the end zone, you know he's coming down that ball in the end zone. He is a jump ball catcher. They're getting him to the end zone. He came out last week after battling injury for a few weeks now. He's ready to roll. He's rocking. Colts offense is going. Philip Rivers has time. I don't see the Smith bros getting that pressure on Philip Rivers. Philip Rivers' arm talent may not be what it once was, but his thought process is still there, and he can still throw a 20-yard ball as well as anybody. He's been knocked on those picks, not because of what his thought process is, but because I don't think his arm is NFL caliber anymore. I still think he can think a game. I think he manages a game, and I think that's why we see the Colts record the way it is right now, because he's been managing games. He hasn't been asked to win a game on his arm because those days are gone. But he's still one of the smartest signal callers in the league. He still knows, hey, you know what? Nyheim Hines is pretty good. I'm just going to dump this ball off to him and watch him pick up 15, 20 yards. Hey, you know, Michael Pittman's in the end zone. He's got a 5'9" corner on him. I'm just going to toss this up there and see what he can do. T.Y. Hilton hasn't been very effective all season. We've seen that transfer over. I want to see if this continues. I do believe Michael Pittman outproduces Devontae Adams. It's just one of those gut calls. I got really no numbers to back this up, but it just feels like I'm going off a feel here. That means Devontae Adams is probably going to go off, but we've seen Mark Valdez-Scantling have some success last week, and Aaron Rodgers kind of turned to him. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the Colts are having a lot of success, and a lot of it is that defense. There is the other recommendation I'm going to make in terms of running backs to go get is Aaron Jones. Not because of this week. I actually don't expect a huge week this week, but he does. He's another one of these backs that has a very good playoff schedule. So he is a guy who has not necessarily been very good. I think he's not signed for next year, correct? I mean, he's a guy that I think is acquirable in dynasty leagues. If you're making a run, he might not be as expensive as you think. And he's got a very good schedule going forward. So if you're competing, that might be a guy to target. Now, just on the other side,
I'm just going to jump in here. Cut you off here. Week 13 Eagles, Week 14 Lions, Week 15 Panthers before the Titans in your championship week for Aaron Jones. Go ahead.
Yeah, just really good matchups in almost all those games. So I really like him, for competing teams as a target for you. Now let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts and their offense real quick, because I think this is an offense that I looked into a lot over the offseason. And Frank Reich, this was one of my favorite stats in the offseason. Frank Reich, in his 6 years as an offensive play caller, he had 1,000-yard rusher and 1,000-yard receiver. That he does not look likely to get number 2 on either one of those this season. Now, some of that's injuries, sure, but I think we are looking at a situation right now where his best rookie appears to be the one that they spent the highest draft pick on, and that's Michael Pittman. And Michael Pittman looked fantastic last week. The rapport that he's developing with Phillip Rivers looks very good after some injuries. I think it's nice to see what he's doing. If they could get Paris Campbell back, I mean, you could be talking about a pretty formidable set of weapons that Phillip Rivers has. That includes Nyheim Hines. And I'm just going to pat myself. I'm going to tear my shoulder patting myself on the back on this. But you mentioned Chase's show. On Chase's show over the offseason, he asked us for a hot take. It's the first time I was ever on with Chase. One of my hot takes, Nyheim Hines would be the leading fantasy scorer for the Indianapolis Colts. I said that before the season started. Through 10 weeks, guess who the top scoring running back for the Indianapolis Colts is? It's Nyheim Hines. He's outproducing Jonathan Taylor. And, and this was, I was expecting Marlon Mack to be more involved. I think if Marlon Mack didn't get hurt, I wonder what Jonathan Taylor's role is on this offense right now. That doesn't mean that I think it's time to give up on him or that he's a bust, but I think we could be looking at a really tough situation for him right now. Maybe even similar to the one we're seeing in Baltimore for Dobbins, had Mack not gotten hurt.
I think you're right. I think it'd be the exact same situation we're seeing in Baltimore right now. You've got a Gus Edwards kind of, how do you want to say this? I think Marlon Mack is a combination of Hines and Jonathan Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jonathan Taylor is the better power runner, but Marlon Mack can run between the tackles just as well. Marlon Mack can catch the ball, but not quite as well as Nyheim Hines, which is twice as good as what Jonathan Taylor can do out of the backfield in the passing game. So they've got a three-headed monster there, and just like Baltimore would have. And I honestly still believe, here's my hot take, Marlon Mack's a better running back than Jonathan Taylor.
He doesn't run in the back of his offensive line quite as often, does he?
I'm not saying nothing because I know there's a lot of people that believe him. I still think Jonathan Taylor could be a very good running back. One of my knocks on my scouting report is the fact that I knocked him for playing with a Wisconsin line that was so good. It's hard for me to evaluate someone when their line's opening up big holes like that, as opposed to a running back who's finding holes. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where we're at there. Cowboys, Vikings. What do you got?
Well, it's the matchup. Last week we got Tua versus Justin Herbert. And here we go. We get late afternoon, fantastic matchup between Andy Dalton and Kirk Cousins. Just what everybody wants to see.
You know what? This needs to be the primetime game. This really does. Andy Dalton, Kirk Cousins, primetime. Who says no?
Exactly. We need more of that in our life. Here's the biggest thing. Like there's just not a lot with either one of these offenses that makes you very excited. This is a good matchup for Dalvin Cook, and I expect there to be a whole lot of Dalvin Cook, even though we're coming off of good games for Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson and tougher matchups. But I think Dalvin Cook is going to potentially be. That's exactly what Minnesota is going to want to do. They're going to want to go to Dallas or ride Dalvin Cook. Maybe even some Alexander Madison mixed in there. But I know all the Dalvin Cook lovers, he's great. He came back to earth a little bit last week. His fantasy playoff matchups, he's got the New Orleans Saints, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that Chicago Bears defense that just held him in check in the fantasy playoffs. It's the toughest schedule of anyone. Nobody has a schedule like him. I know he's been fantastic all season, but this might be an opportunity where he produces well against Dallas and you start to think about your fantasy championship, getting there, staying there. Otherwise, I'm afraid there's a lot of people that are going to have Dalvin Cook in that running back spot that made the playoffs, riding him, that are going to be week 15 having nothing to do.
Oh, man, this is a tough one for me. I'm trying to sit here from a gambling perspective. I'm trying to think of who a good survivor pick would be. And I want to say Minnesota should dominate this game based on their offense versus what we've seen from the Dallas defense. That said, I'm not so sure I trust either one of these teams right now. I can't get behind an Andy Dalton-led team anymore after what Andy Dalton done me dirty earlier on in the season. We don't need to roll the clip of what happened when last time I believed in Andy Dalton. It was painful. And I'm pretty confident I still have a sore throat from that. That's probably why my voice has been sounding like this. I still think I've got sesame seeds ingrained into my inner throat from Andy Dalton and the belief I had in him once upon a time. So I'm going to go with everything to do with the Vikings on this one. I think Justin Jefferson is going to be sexy in this matchup. I think Adam Thielen is going to find the end zone. I think Dalvin Cook's going to eat. We're going to let Dalvin cook, so to speak. Man, I feel so dirty using the same line everyone else has been using lately, because this Dallas team isn't very good. I think the Vikings win this game because Andy Dalton hates me. I believe strongly that I can't trust any of the receivers in Dallas. I want to get in on CeeDee Lamb. I want to get in on Amari Cooper. I want to keep believing in Michael Gallup, but I can't because they don't all have success at the same time. Week before the season started with Dak Prescott-led Cowboys team, we were talking about 3 potential 1,000-yard receivers coming out of Dallas. Remember those talks? Where are they gone? I'm happy to get one Dallas Cowboy receiver to 100 yards in a game right now, and I don't know who it's going to be. This matchup kind of says, you know what, if I had to rank them for this week, I would probably go CeeDee, Amari, Michael Gallup. It'd probably be how I'd rank them, how I'd feel as far as I trust them. I can't even trust Ezekiel Elliott right now. There's not a single stud. I mean stud. These are guys you drafted to be studs on your fantasy rosters that I trust in Dallas without Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott not playing has probably helped his payday more than if he was playing this year. He still has more passing yards than Lamar Jackson. You know what I'm saying? Like the numbers that he was on pace for are insane. Alas, I'm taking the Vikings to win this game. I think their big name players actually produce where I can't trust the Dallas Cowboys here. I would like to, but I don't. I think Justin Jefferson is in line for another 125 yards receiving. I think Thielen's going to be over 100 yards receiving. I think Dalvin Cook's going to have over 100 yards rushing. That's what I believe. That's what I'm watching for. And now on to Sunday Night Football.
The game
I will let you take. This is the game of the week. Why is it the game of the week? You have a 8-1 Kansas City Chiefs team facing off against a 6-3 MVP-led Derek Carr Raiders team, who happens to be the only team in the AFC West who has not lost to an AFC West team. Fact check that. Yeah, you're going to. The Raiders' record in the division is perfect. The Chiefs' record has one loss. That one loss to the Raiders, who outplayed them by more than what the score would allow you to believe. The Raiders played a fantastic game. Everything went right for the Raiders, and to beat the Chiefs, everything has to go right. Let's be honest. This is, by all means, a revenge game for the Chiefs. We want to talk about revenge games for players. This is a revenge game for the Chiefs. I don't want to say you were embarrassed, but when you're hyped up to here and you lose to a team that's probably not getting the respect that they deserve, there's a few teams that come to mind. Miami's a team that doesn't get the respect. Carolina is a team that hasn't got the respect they deserve for what they've done with what they have. The Raiders aren't getting the respect, except for me, but I'm a homer, so that's a little bit different. Their wins this year have come against the Chiefs, the Saints. They've knocked off some big dogs, the Raiders have. They've lost some games to teams they probably shouldn't have, including the Patriots, who now we're starting to see are a better team than we thought they were, we thought they should have been to start the year with. This is going to be an interesting matchup. The Chiefs were so desperate for help, so desperate, so broken by that loss to the Raiders. They actually went out, and it sounds like they signed DeAndre Baker, fresh out of prison. Well, he never actually went to prison, but that's how desperate they are to find someone who can match up. I know you're going to dump on me as soon as I'm done my monologue here, but it doesn't matter. What everyone wants to knock Derek Carr for not being a fantasy quarterback. And I get it. He doesn't push the ball downfield as much as the other quarterbacks do. But he does things within his means to win games. He's not going to turn the ball over. That's not what he does. Call him a game manager if you will. That's fine. But he's got the Raiders' offense is clicking. John Gruden's got something going right. Obviously, when they put up over 40 points against the Chiefs, they have something cooking. The key into this game is going to be that Raiders defense again. That has not been good. And you've got a Chiefs offense that is rolling. Now, the Chiefs offense, it sounds like Sammy Watkins may be back for this game. Mecole Hardman's not going to be back. I think he's still on the COVID reserve list. Tyreek Hill will be there. Clyde Edwards-Helaire will be there. Le'Veon Bell, who wasn't there in the first matchup, he will be there. I don't think we've seen Andy Reid use Le'Veon Bell the way he plans on using Le'Veon Bell. I think he's kind of holding that ace in the pocket right now. I really do believe that. I do believe we're going to see a situation multiple times in the game where Edwards-Helaire's in the backfield and Le'Veon Bell split out wide. I really do. I really believe that's what they did from the get-go. But dare I say it, if the Raiders win this, they're one game back of the Chiefs for the division with the tiebreaker in hand. This could make this race get really interesting, especially when we're talking about the playoffs. And not only do I want the Raiders to win because I'm a Raiders fan, but I really think this is going to muddy up that whole playoff picture altogether because I do not think the Steelers can go perfect. They're going to lose one or two down the stretch. If the Chiefs lose this one, I don't see the Chiefs losing another game. If they lose this one, they may lose two, and I think that's kind of where the Chiefs are at too, is a two-loss team. I don't know where they're going to get that second loss. I'm hoping it's this week. But could you imagine if somehow the Raiders can win the division and you get the Chiefs getting knocked down into that wild card spot and then possibly playing a top team in the first round of the playoffs or whatever because the 7 seed has to play the 2 seed. We could have round 3 for this. No matter how you look at it, there could be a round 3 Raiders-Chiefs game in the playoffs. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a lot there. I think this is a very different matchup than the first one. I think the first one was, you might even say that I think the Raiders took the Chiefs by almost by surprise. I mean, anytime you have an interdivisional matchup, obviously it's not completely by surprise, but I think the Raiders played up to that game, and I think the Chiefs played down to that game. And I think
let's go here one step further. Derek Carr played up in that game. 22 of 31, 347, 3 touchdowns. That was not your typical Derek Carr game.
And I will say also, it's not been who he has been the last 3 weeks either. In fact, you talked long enough about this, you allowed me to do some quick math. And in the last 3 weeks, Derek Carr has exactly 40 more passing yards than Alex Smith had last week alone.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, when you talk about fantasy-wise, Derek Carr, and that's really what we talked a lot about this last week, he has been a very big fantasy disappointment for me because now there were some good games in the beginning of the year, but now he's had some really good matchups, some matchups where you want to play him, you want him to do well, that he has just really struggled to be effective. So I'm really looking elsewhere when it comes to quarterbacks this week. I mean, almost doesn't matter who my other option is. I have a league where Daniel Jones is my other option. I wish New York was playing because I would start him over him. But this is a much different Kansas City team as well. When you look at what the Chiefs have been doing the last few weeks, they have all but abandoned the run. They basically do not. They're not on very many rushing attempts at all. It seems like right now, and they've just let Pat Mahomes do his thing, and that's exactly what he's done. Last few weeks, he's lit the scoreboard up. I expect them to put the ball in his hands a ton early on this time. Not go in there with the idea that they're going to be a running team, which it looked like in the very beginning of this year. They kind of thought they might be. And I think he's going to pass. I think this is going to be a very, very different game script than it was the last time.
So just to give you a heads up, the Chiefs are good against the pass. They really are a good team against the pass. Outside of Derek Carr's 345 or 47-yard passing game, only 2 other quarterbacks, I believe, I'm just double-checking here before I get too carried away, only 2 other quarterbacks have hit the 300-yard mark passing. Boy Wonder, Justin Herbert, and Teddy Bridgewater are the only quarterbacks to hit 300 yards against the Chiefs this season. So I do not expect Derek Carr to hit 300 this week because that Chiefs defense is better than advertised. They're not the Chiefs defense that we made fun of last year where, you get some points on them, you get some yards on them, mostly because they're blowing teams out and teams are getting garbage time. So, again, not all stats are created equal here. That said, I'm looking forward to this game. I think it's going to be a fantastic matchup, and it's a division game. We talked about the Falcons and Chiefs. You got to remember, even a couple of years ago, the Raiders were horrible, and the Chiefs were flying. And that one Monday Night Football game, the Raiders came out of nowhere and won a game they had no business to win. That is what the Chiefs and Raiders are. That is what that AFC West is. When you get into the division matchups, there's not a lot of games you go, that's an absolute win. Because we've seen in the past what taking a team for granted would be. If you would have asked me as a analyst going back to week 5, Chiefs, Raiders, I would have taken the Chiefs as an analyst. As a homer, that ain't going to happen. But if I'm giving advice, I'm saying start your Chiefs. Travis Kelce, this is a fantastic matchup. Corey Littleton is probably out again. I think he was on their COVID list as well. Fire up Travis Kelce. I think he has a huge game, which he did not, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he did not have a very good game the last time these two teams met. I just want to pull this up real quick before we move on. But just to give you an idea here, Travis Kelce back in week 5. Oh, no, he did have a big week. Sorry. It was the week 7 against the Broncos that he struggled, 3 for 31. Against the Raiders, he had 8 for 104 and 1 touchdown on 12 targets. So you could feel pretty confident trusting Kelce. I think he has even a bigger week than that this week. I would say 150 yards is going to be very much in play. Anyway, enough about my Raiders because I could talk about this all night.
No,
let's get.
I want to say one more thing about the Raiders. This is
one last thing.
One last thing. This is almost a must-win week for your team. I mean, this is they're 6-3. They're currently in that 5th slot.
They are tied with the Ravens, the Dolphins, the Browns are all at 6-3. It's very congested there.
Yes,
and the Titans
and the Dolphins. I mean, there's all the way down to the 9th team in the conference at 6-3. So very tight group. This is nobody in there wants to lose this week, and this is obviously a tough test for them. So they
now
gotta go and win.
Real quick on that whole thing too. As a Raiders fan, if we're talking playoffs, I know we're not really getting into the whole fantasy aspect here on this one, but the Raiders' schedule lightens up a little bit down the stretch. They played a very difficult schedule early on. After the Chiefs game, they get the Falcons, the Jets, they get the Colts, but then they get the Chargers again and the Dolphins. That week 16 matchup is going to be really interesting for this playoff push. But you have got, so say they lose. They're 6-3. They go to 6-4. Falcons should be 7-4. Jets should be 8-4. Say they lose to the Colts is 8-5. They beat the Chargers. That's 9-5. Then they get the Dolphins at 9-5. That's going to be a key matchup because I think the Dolphins are probably going to be in that 9-5 range at that point too.
Yeah.
And we know the Ravens are going to get things together. The Ravens and the Titans are both going to get everything together. Speaking of teams that have got things rolling right now, the Los Angeles Rams have looked pretty good the last couple of weeks. That defense is rolling. I'm taking the Rams to beat the Bucs here this week because of one thing. Ali Muppet. We talk about offensive lines, especially the interior. First off, if you have 3 all-pro players playing in your interior line, center and your guards, Aaron Donald's still going to slap them around silly. If you have a backup guard, anyone who's a backup in your interior line against Aaron Donald, the dude is going to eat. And I don't care how good of a quarterback is, Tom Brady, included in this conversation with his quick release, Aaron Donald in your face the second you snap the ball is going to make your night very difficult. That, with the fact that Jalen Ramsey is probably going to be all up in someone's grill. So now you're going to be down one receiver. I don't care if he's on Mike Evans. I don't know if it's on Chris Godwin. I think Godwin's going to play in the slot. AB is going to be out there. Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Donald, you got a pass rush, you get a cover corner, makes a huge difference. I think this is a game that the Bucs, even though they're at home on Monday Night Football, last time we saw them on primetime, it didn't go so well for them. I think this might go just as bad as that matchup against the Saints. What do you got?
Yeah, Tom Brady, greatest of all time. There's no doubt. Where he struggles, if he struggles anywhere, is when he gets pressure up the middle. We know who Aaron Donald is. We know that he is going to have an opportunity to get up the middle against Tom Brady, and I think just get him off his spot. And that does change things. He's never been the most mobile quarterback. He's 87 years old now. He's not going to be mobile. It's not the kind of week that I think you are looking at Tom Brady if you can help it. And honestly, even with his immense number of weapons, I think if Chris Godwin can be that guy that is a short target that can get open quick, yeah, maybe he can produce for you. Mike Evans, I think, is probably going to be that guy on Jalen Ramsey. I don't think he's going to have enough time to create separation. We know he can struggle against elite cornerbacks anyway. Antonio Brown at some point is going to have a coming out party. I don't really necessarily think that this is the week for that. But I think there's going to be a lot of defense, and even on both sides. There's not a lot of matchups that I think, hey, here's a really great fantasy matchup that I'm really looking forward to. I think this is one of those games. It's probably going to be low scoring. There's going to be some turnovers, some different things that kind of change the momentum of the game. Maybe a kick return, something like that. But when you're done with that game, I want you to remember both of these teams look really good for the fantasy playoffs. I've mentioned that a few times here. Tom Brady, second best quarterback fantasy playoff schedule. Goff, number 5. Rams wide receivers have the best fantasy playoff matchups in terms of who's given up the most points. So better days are ahead, but I'm expecting a lot of defense in this. I'm not expecting a lot of Monday night miracles.
No, I think this is going to be a lot lower scoring. We got 2 good defenses there. We got the Rams that can do what he said, pressure and cover. We got a very good Buccaneers defense. Like, they got 2 of the best linebackers in the game, especially in Vontae David and Devin White. They can make up ground in a hurry. I don't think you're going to see the Hendersons, Malcolm Browns, Cam Akers breaking out kind of plays you've seen in the past couple weeks. Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp. We talk about Cooper Kupp's schedule down the stretch. We want to go get him. We'd rather have him than DJ Moore. Just kind of going around here. Like, this is a matchup. I think I'm glad I don't have any fantasy players in this matchup, so I can sit back and just enjoy good football, because I think that's what it's going to come down to.
Yep.
I love my defense. I love watching defense. So that's probably my biggest takeaway here is just going to be sit back, watch some good defense, watch 2 teams go at it, slug it out. And both these teams need these wins. We know that NFC West is going to be tight. We know the NFC West is going to be tight. You got the Cardinals playing well. You've got the Seahawks kind of back. They've been doing what I like to call the Matty Stafford seesaw, because they've been going up and down all year. You've got the 49ers, who are going to get better. Raheem Mostert looks like he's going to be back after the bye. Deebo Samuel should be back after the bye. They're getting healthy after the bye here, so they could make some noise down the stretch too. These are some things we got to keep in mind. And one thing we need to start looking at now is our trade deadlines are coming up in just about every league you're in. And now is the time to make a move. I would rather make a move a week early than make a move a week late, so to speak, when you've allowed the rest of your league mates to get in on a guy. So if you're looking at, like I said, I mentioned earlier, Travis Kelce, I'm looking at selling Miles Sanders and Hunter Henry to get Travis Kelce, a 2-for-1 special. You talked about maybe trading DJ Moore for Cooper Kupp. This is a redraft we're talking about here, of course. Maybe. But you want to maybe look because of the schedule, the strength of schedule down the stretch. Maybe now's the time, after this Rams game, you go out there and you go find that Tom Brady owner. And you solidify your quarterback position down the stretch. If you're stuck rotating quarterbacks, maybe a Joe Burrow, Carson Wentz, Matt Stafford, Matt Ryan. If you have any of these guys, maybe you go find that Tom Brady owner and you go give him an offer here after the Rams game. Don't do it before. Do it after, because I think he's going to have a bit of a stinker here in Week 11. So we're going into next week. We're going to do some homework. We're going to start off our show with 5 guys to acquire. We're going to start our show off with that next week. And we're going to give you that for the trade deadline kind of coming up. Guys can try and get to ahead of time. So you have some time. And so Calvin knows, because I just kind of sprung him out on now. You can tell by him nodding in approval. We'll give you these 5 guys to trade for, 5 guys to get rid of kind of thing. And we'll hit you with that so you know who to go for. Because that is the hard-hitting factual facts that we hit you with every week on the ViperCast.
As long as you don't fact check us, we're fine.
Just don't fact check us. Don't fact check us.
Yeah.
To be honest, we're really just a couple slump busters here hoping to hit one. For Calvin and Hobby, I'm Matt Donnelly. This is episode 27 of the ViperCast. Calvin, you got anything?
Nope, we gone.
We go!